you're going to be reintroduced into Venn diagrams. Remember what a Venn diagram is? It's two diagrams with this point called the intersection. So, for example, this would be called, let's say, situation A, situation B, and this is what they both have in common. So let's say, if you're a kid that likes to read, let's say there's 5 kids somewhere that like to read, and there are, let's say, 20 kids that like to sleep. Kids like to read, but they don't like to sleep. Kids like to sleep, but they don't like to read. But let's say you have a 6 in the middle right here. That means there's 6 kids that do like to sleep and read. Let's say you have 50 here on the outside. 50 means there's 50 kids that don't like to read and don't like to sleep, or both. You're going to have a couple questions about that in your classwork today over Venn diagrams. That's not geometry at all, but I wanted to bring that up because that's the very first thing in the notes that you printed up that you should be following along with in the notes. Okay, I'm going to go over some vocabulary with you right now. I'm going to talk about triangles. The very first thing is called an isosceles triangle. Now, if you remember from last year, whenever you have 2 tick marks, these tick marks mean that the sides are congruent. You learned that when you were studying congruency, triangle congruency, like side, angle, side, angle, side, angle, side, angle, side, 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 side. You learned about tick marks. All these tick marks means is this left side is congruent to this right side. This is called an isosceles triangle when you have 2 sides that are congruent. Now, what they are going to expect you to remember, if you have 2 sides that are congruent, you can assume that where these 2 come down at this bottom base, these base angles are also the same. So you're going to have questions where they give you a triangle and they're going to tell you this is an isosceles triangle. And let's say this is 70 degrees. This angle is 70 degrees. They want you to find the other 2 angles. Go ahead and pause this video and see if you can find these other 2 angles based off of the information that this is an isosceles triangle. Okay, you should have unpaused it, tried it at least, knowing that this is a base angle and this is also an angle that's congruent to this. It's not going to tell you that you have 2 base angles that are the same. 70 plus 70 is 140. You should remember from last year in IM1 that all 3 angles add together to give you 180 degrees. So to find this remaining angle, you would do 180 minus 70, which is 30 degrees. So 70 and 70 is 140. I'm sorry, not 30, 40 degrees. 70 and 70 is 140, plus another 40 degrees gives you 180 degrees. These are called isosceles triangles. And one thing to remember is that it won't always tell you this, is that base angles are exactly the same. The next kind of triangle is called, it's a regular triangle. Now, what regular means is every single side is exactly the same. Regular triangles, remember I talked about this in the first recorded lessons that you watched. Regular means every single side and angle is the same. And a equilateral triangle is the only polygon where they give it its own name. Equilateral triangle means every side is the same and also every angle is the same. And you should know that every angle in this triangle is going to be 60 degrees. Now look, just because you have 3 tick marks here and the same tick marks here, it doesn't mean that all these 3 sides are congruent to this. Because you can do this. You can have 3 tick marks here, 3 and 3. That means these are still congruent because there's 3 tick marks. As long as you have the same amount of tick marks on every single side, you're good. You're totally good. Okay. the book is also going to be talking about, I don't know if you studied this in IM1. It's going to talk about lines of symmetry. What a line of symmetry is, let's take an isosceles triangle. An isosceles triangle has a vertical line of symmetry, because if you just cut this straight up and down, the left side is symmetrical to the right side. A vertical line of symmetry means you can cut it, boom, right down the middle, and the left and the right side, if you flip it over, it's exactly the same. But this shape has a vertical line of symmetry, but it does not have a horizontal line of symmetry. The top and the bottom are not the same. Can you think of a shape that has a horizontal line of symmetry? Probably the easiest one that you could come up with would be a square or a rectangle. They would have vertical line of symmetry and horizontal line of symmetry. Anyways, they're going to talk to you about lines of symmetry. Next thing is a parallelogram. If you look on the notes, a parallelogram, the only thing that makes a shape a parallelogram is if you have it's a quadrilateral, which means 4 sides. The top and bottom sides are parallel, and the left and right sides are parallel. On the notes, I give you an example. You can have a parallelogram where you can have a square or a rectangle, or you can slant it, just as long as the top and bottom and the left and right sides are parallel. Now look, on the notes, I give you arrows. What these arrows means is kind of like tick marks. This is from IM1 as well. The top and the bottom side are parallel because they have the same amount of arrows. Can this shape make any sense? You should look at this and go, no, that makes no sense, because these two lines can be parallel, sure, but if this has 2 arrows, that conceptually means that this line and this line and this line are parallel, which is impossible. This line is not parallel to this line. So the only way that this can make sense is if you were to get rid of one of these. Now this should make sense. So anyways, these 2 lines are parallel and these 2 lines are parallel because of the arrows. Whenever the top and bottom or left or right side have the same amount of arrows on it, that means they're parallel. Okay, now I'm going to talk to you about some terminology. I'm going to take a line and this is L, M, Q, N, P. All right. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to give you some terminology, and these first 2 have to do with 2 angles. The word complementary angles. Complementary means when you have 2 angles that add together to give you 90 degrees only. For example, here's a 90-degree angle, but this is not a complementary angle, because complementary angles are 2 angles. When you put them next to each other, they equal 90 degrees. So 2 complementary angles would be angles L, M, N, and we write angle like this, L, M, N, and angle N, M, P. N, M, P. These 2 angles add together to give me 90 degrees. How do I know they add together to give me 90 degrees, or they're complementary of each other? Well, if this is 90 degrees, this also has to be 90 degrees because this is a straight line, which equals 180 degrees. So these 2 angles are complementary to each other. The next angles are supplementary. Complementary is 90 degrees. Supplementary are 2 angles that give you a straight line. So can you look at this for a second? Pause it and tell me if you can give me 2 angles that are supplementary to each other. You can't say this. You can't say LMQ. LMQ is actually an angle. Anytime it has a degree, it's an angle. LMQ is a straight line, which equals 180. Can you tell me there's only one set of supplementary angles in here that equal 180 degrees? Think about it. All right, so if you paused it and checked it out, you should have saw that this angle, which is LMP, and you can also call this angle LMP or PML. So I'm going to say angle LMP, this angle right here, and this angle right here, which is angle. This symbol just means angle, QMP. QMP. These two are supplementary. You're going to see these two words a lot in this class this year. Supplementary and complementary. Supplementary means two angles that add together to give you 180. Complementary means two angles that add together to give you only 90 degrees. Okay, now I talk about a little more vocabulary. Acute and obtuse. Acute is anything smaller than 90. It's just one angle. It's not a set of angles, just one angle that's smaller than 90 degrees. So let's look at this. An acute angle could be LMN. There's an acute angle because it's less than 90, or PMN. Look, just because I'm saying PMN, you can also call this same angle NMP, or you can call this same angle NML. Just as long as the M is in the middle, doesn't matter how you name it. So LMN is an acute angle, and NMP is an acute angle. Can you think of an obtuse angle? Obtuse is bigger than 90. It cannot equal 90 degrees. It has to be bigger. There's only one angle in here that's actually bigger than 90 degrees. And that angle is this. Watch what happens when I do this. What's this angle? Some of you guys might be going like, hey, you're tripping. That's not an angle. It is. A straight line is actually an angle. Angle LMQ, and you would just label like this. Angle LMQ, because even you guys are used to normally angles look like this. Some type of two rays going off, but an angle could be, boom, a straight line. Still an angle because it still has degrees in it. The next thing I talk about is a vertical angle. And one thing you guys need to know is next to vertical angle, you need to write down in your notes, they are congruent. Vertical angles are congruent. Vertical angles are always congruent. Vertical angles are congruent, and they look like this. It's an X. This top and bottom angle are exactly the same. They are congruent. This angle here and here are congruent. These two angles are called adjacent, means they're next to. So next, the word adjacent just means next to. It doesn't mean they're always congruent. But vertical angles are always congruent. So sorry, my cat had to be let in. All right, so look. Let's say this is 70 degrees. If this is 70 degrees, then it says fill in the rest of the information. Okay. If this is 70 degrees, this is also 70 degrees. Why? Because vertical angles are, boom, congruent. Now we can find this angle and this angle. Well, look. What is this? This angle and this angle right here. These two angles, we just learned what they're called. Supplementary. Why are they supplementary? Because it gives you a straight line. How many degrees is a straight line? 180. How would we find this? Well, if we didn't know this angle, I know that 180 degrees is a straight line. If I minused 70 degrees, this would have to be 110 degrees. This is 110. And then lastly, what is this angle? 110. Because you could have said these two are supplementary or vertical angles. See how everything works out when you fill in everything? Vertical angles are congruent. Vertical angles are congruent. These are vertical angles. The next thing. Right triangle. You should remember from last year, Pythagorean theorem, right triangles. How do you know it's a right triangle? Because it has a little box, and that means it's 90 degrees. Later on, we're going to be reviewing right triangles. Let's say this is 3 and 5, and you have to find this side. Pause this for a second, see if you remember how to find Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, so if you paused it, you should have saw that a squared plus b squared, which is what you don't know, equals c squared. Some people might be asking, how do I know that this is a and that this isn't a? It doesn't matter. Because a and b, it doesn't matter. What matters is your hypotenuse is on the other side of the equal sign. Okay, so look, you have 9 plus b squared equals 25. Then this is just basic isolating the b squared. How do you get the 9 to the other side? Subtract it. B squared equals, move this over by subtracting it, 16. And then from math 1, how do you get rid of a square? You square, boom, root it. Giving you this side to be square root of 16 is 4. That's Pythagorean theorem. You should have covered that a good amount in IM2. All right. But anyways, whenever you see the word right triangle, it means the angle right there is 90 degrees. And last thing, a scalene triangle. A scalene triangle I have on notes, it's all messed up. No stinking sides the same. This side is not congruent to this side, which is not congruent to this side. All these tick marks mean is nothing's congruent because they don't have the same amount of tick marks. You can't tell how big a side is based off of the tick marks. The only information that it gives you is whether they're congruent or not. All right. What I want you to do is look at your notes. The very first thing I say is, this is 118 degrees. I say find these 3. Now when you find these 3 sides, I have y. Because I want you to find this and tell yourself why. And I want you to find this and ask yourself, ask yourself, why does that equal what you found? Find this and ask yourself, why? Pause it, see if you can find these 3 angles. All right, so if you should have paused it, if this is 118 degrees, this is 118 degrees. Why? Because vertical angles are congruent. Okay, cool. Now, if this is 118 degrees, this is 62 degrees. How do you know that? Well, these are supplementary angles. And 180 degrees minus 118 degrees is going to equal this, which is 62 degrees. What is this angle? This is 62 degrees. Question is, why? Because vertical angles are, boom, you guessed it, congruent. Okay, next one. This has to do with supplementary angles. You have one angle of 81 degrees. What is the other angle? Well, you should have paused it and said if this is 81, this is 99. Why? Because they are supplementary. And the last one has to do with complementary. I tell you that it's 90 degrees because I give you that box, and I also tell you if this is 73 degrees, what is this remaining angle? Well, based off of what you know, these 2 angles, 73 degrees plus some angle equal 90 degrees. How do we find out what that angle is? Well, just basic isolating this. We can just call this the missing angle, or probably better, we could just call it x. All right, subtract 73 degrees from both sides. And this is going to be 17 degrees. How did I get that? Basic algebra, minus 73 to get x, which is what this angle was, equals 17 degrees. So your assignment is from chapter 1. We're going to do one more assignment on Thursday. After Thursday, the next Monday, you're going to have your chapter 1 test.